Hello, everyone. So there's a lot of news to cover. Obviously, recent school shooting happened, and I'll get to that first. In Parkland, Florida, the shooter was identified as Nicholas Cruz. Um, we know a few things about him. He likely was mentally ill. Um, I read that police visited his house 39 times over the span of 7 years, and it's hard to tell exactly like why that's the case, like why the cops had to go there that many times. Um, but basically, the the reports that I read pretty much outlined that it was a volatile situation. You know, whether it's the parents or the kid, it was pretty clear that this kid was not in a very good place. Um, and there were reports that he was with a white supremacist militia and they trained him. I think most importantly, though, is that, first of all, he was banned when he was at this school. When he used to go there, he was expelled from the school. That's important, too. But when he was there, he was banned from bringing a backpack to school. And he made threats against teachers and students. So, there were a lot of red flags with this shooter, as is the case with a lot of these things. Not all of them, but I think this was a case where if there was stricter laws, if there was more enforcement of the law, we could have probably prevented this shooting. And there's actually a more specific reason why. Actually, almost to the day, a year ago, Trump repealed an Obama-era rule that barred people with certain mental illnesses from buying weapons. And when it comes to the mental illness argument, I kind of am on the fence. I think you have to have a discussion about how you're going to do that. I think mental illness is too big a blanket for me, because it's like mental illness. I mean, you could have somewhat mild depression, and that's a mental illness, I guess. Someone can be kind of like a manic personality, and they're really good at getting things done, whatever it is. The point I'm making is there's mental illnesses that, in my view, aren't necessarily going to prevent you from being a responsible gun owner. So where do you draw the line with that? I think it's a debatable topic. It's interesting. Certain mental illnesses, I would say, yeah, sure, they probably shouldn't be able to own a gun. If you're someone perhaps who suffers from severe schizophrenia, then yeah, probably you shouldn't own a gun. But it's really important to point out, though, that like the Republicans and the right, this is the leg that they stand on, because they always want to deflect the conversation about guns. They want to say, oh, this isn't about guns. This is about mental health. Well, Trump repealed that rule that barred certain people with mental illnesses from buying guns, and he repealed it. Also, as we'll get to later, like they just want to defund healthcare in every way, shape, and form. That they want to make things harder for people to get healthcare. So where's the solution there? If you're saying that it's a mental health issue, like if you're saying that, then shouldn't the solution be expanding healthcare to more people? Expanding the access, they would say, probably, because the whole point is if you're not able to afford it, then you have no right to it. But it's just not really looking good, I would say, for the Republicans. I think this is an issue where the will of the people is kind of starting to really give way. And we're seeing the students from this school shooting, people that were actually there when it happened and had to live through it. They're out now speaking about gun reform, and I've never seen students, even going back to Columbine. I've never seen students this much at the forefront of the dialogue. It's always been the adults kind of talking and saying, let's do something about this. But now you have a younger generation that's really stepping it up, and they're going all over national TV, and it's great. And the vast majority of Americans agree we should have a universal background check. I think it's ridiculous to say that we shouldn't or couldn't reform our system. There's too many instances now where there was a lapse in the system, and there was a mistake, and this person shouldn't have gotten a gun, but oops, they did. So you can't just stick your head in the sand anymore. Excuse me. I think you need to really just admit, yeah, we need reform, and the answer isn't easy. It's not like it's just a quick, simple solution. But I think we have to start having the discussion about what we're going to do. Then we get to the Russia investigation. Mueller indicts 13 Russian nationals. Now, this doesn't really have to do with collusion. Let's just put that out on the table. I mean, the whole kind of vibe you get reading the report here is that the Russians were basically being sneaky about what they were doing, and it says none of the Americans that they interacted with, they did this unwittingly. They didn't know that they were talking to Russian actors here. So, when Trump tweets like there was no collusion, until there's more information, he's correct. Okay, there's nothing in this new revelation that shows there was collusion. It shows Russia preferred Trump, but more what they were trying to do was what they wanted to undermine American democracy. They wanted to sow discord, was the exact phrase they used. And we know this because they supported Donald Trump, and then when he won, they started supporting efforts that were anti-Trump as well. They had an anti-Trump rally, days after the election. There were even reports earlier that Russia was pushing like Black Lives Matter on social media. So it was more of an effort to, I guess, kind of troll America. I mean, these were really just Twitter trolls we're talking about. People on social media that were pretending to be other people. And that's where you get into kind of the complicated aspect of this, because there were real crimes committed, identity theft and fraud. So, that should be investigated, of course. I would never dismiss that. But people are making the case that this is like a 9/11 level threat, or this is like the next Pearl Harbor. This is like an attack on the entire country. Okay, first of all, I think it's quite something that the implication is these Russian bots, these fake accounts on social media, they had more of an influence on the election than the Democrats did themselves. The Democrats whine and complain about Russian meddling. Well, why don't you take responsibility and start taking control of the dialogue and the debate here? And whenever they did that, it was platitudes, cliches, as I've always said. It's stuff that didn't stick, and it was because they were playing it too safe. They could have ran a real progressive message that resonated with people, but they didn't. So I'm not going to blame Russia for that. The Democrats could have been much stronger if they wanted to, and they probably could have had more of an impact than they did. And this idea, like, to be perfectly honest, I think the results would have been more or less the same if there were no Russian meddling. And you know, we need to look into those crimes that I said, identity theft and fraud, excuse me. We need to look into those regardless if they had an outcome on the election. And the report says that there's no evidence that it did have an effect. They always have to add that caveat that they always have these headlines out there that say, you know, Russian meddling, new report, Russia hacked the voter rolls. And then deep buried in the article it says, oh yeah, this had no effect on the election whatsoever. So it's fear-mongering. It's classic fear-mongering. You know, I think I've made this point before. We shouldn't be escalating with Russia. You know, they feel threatened and cheated by us, largely because of the NATO buildup right now, and you know, in previous administrations, we promised we wouldn't expand on the NATO border, and we did. So, you know, we can argue about whether that's right or wrong, what we did, but we have to, I think, view things in perspective and view things the way, if you were Russia, how would you feel in that situation? I mean, if you were Vladimir Putin, that's your country. I mean, you know, Putin's not a good guy. Of course not. But the point is, he's going to do what he thinks is best for his country. So, you know, another thing is the double standard. It's not going to do us any favors. The fact that the U.S. does way more than meddle in elections using Twitter trolls. Okay, we bomb 8 different countries. We do meddle in other countries. We in the 50s overthrew the Iranian government and placed a dictator so we could jack their natural resources. Excuse me. Rex Tillerson recently just floated the idea of regime change in Venezuela. That's great. So we're like literally on the brink of that with North Korea now, and now we're just going to throw Venezuela on there as well. Hillary said we should have rigged the Palestinian election in 2008 because of Hamas and all that. I recently found out that Israel had a lot to do with the creation of Hamas, but I don't want to get into that. But she did say, yeah, we should interfere in a democratic election. So what does that tell you? Joe Biden recently bragged about basically baiting the Ukrainian government with aid money. They were saying, if you don't fire this prosecutor, then no aid money. And he made it clear that's what it was about. It was about this particular guy that they wanted out. And if that's not interference, you're basically saying we have our own political goals, so we're going to threaten you. That's what that is. So at the end of the day, the new Russian indictments, they aren't without any merits. They have some real crimes to be investigated, but it's not collusion. It's not treason. I don't know if we're ever going to see something like that. I'm holding judgment for now, but I'm just saying I don't think anything that's been presented so far has shown that Putin has Trump under his thumb. Then we go to Scott Pruitt, the EPA. Says climate change might be good. In January, he told Reuters that the climate is changing, but asked, how do we know what the ideal surface temperature is in 2100? It's pretty arrogant for people in 2018 to say we know what the ideal surface temperature should be in 2100. Okay. Well, we know that there'll be too much. There could be too much. I don't know. Which chemical even. I guess nitrogen. Nitrogen. You could basically just change the makeup of the atmosphere and make it so that you can't breathe. There's ways to measure these things. You're changing things so much that maybe humans aren't going to be able to live on the planet. So this idea of ideal surface temperature, ideal for living, maybe not. I mean, unless you want to, adapt into some other species here, oh my gosh. So Pruitt's shift in tone comes as planning continues for a so-called red team, blue team exercise that pits mainstream scientists against climate change deniers. Pruitt told Time in October that such an exercise could create a robust, meaningful debate that he hoped would build consensus around this issue. But climate change scientists say the debate is an unnecessary sideshow that would distract from substantive discussions about policy. And this is an important point. What the climate change deniers do is they make this issue look like it's debatable. They say, oh, we have to have a debate about climate change. Is it real or is it not? The scientists are in an agreement. 98% agree climate change is happening and it's man-made. It might even be more than 98%. It might be like 99.1. At what point, that's the point, is that there's not enough that you could show these people that would convince them that they're still going to say, oh, we need to have this debate about climate change. And as I've said before, Scott Pruitt is banning scientific advisors in the EPA, and they're suing over this. And it's because what Scott Pruitt says he's going to do is he's going to basically work with the oil industry. So work with the people that you're trying to regulate and enforce. Those people are the people that you talk to. And of course, in the goodness of their hearts, they're going to say, oh, this is exactly how you prevent me from doing the wrong thing. Right? They're going to be so principled in telling you how to enforce the law, I'm sure. And, this is the point, is that it's not drain the swamp. It's a complete lie that Trump is, fighting corruption in Washington. He's making things worse. And the reason is because it's a anti-government view. It goes back to Ronald Reagan, where he would say, government isn't the solution, government's the problem. The whole concept is the politicians just stay there and sit on their ass, and private industry dictates the whole conversation. It's really comical because you hear people say all the time, oh, nothing ever gets done in Washington. Well, why do you think that is? The reason is because of the money and the special interests. They prevent real change from happening. And that's why you need to get money out of politics. But apparently, when you tell people that, it sounds, I guess, too pie in the sky that they just dismiss it offhand, whatever. So this is kind of a smaller topic, but I wanted to talk about it anyways. Mike Pence was at the Olympics, and there was kind of like this big deal that there was like a unity between South Korea and North Korea, and everyone was happy about it. And then Mike Pence decided to not stand when they entered into the arena, whatever it was, and it was funny to me. I mean, because the right wing position is right. Like, you're not supposed to make a political statement at a sporting event, right? You're supposed to keep. It's politically correct, right? There's no way that you could do anything to be offended like that, because that's just the PC culture. Um, but here he is making a political statement and being triggered about unity that, at the end of the day, is symbolic. North Korea is still a very oppressive regime. We're on the brink of nuclear war, essentially. And this like little symbolic thing triggered Mike Pence that he didn't stand when they entered. It's just like, why wouldn't you want to see some kind of unity? Even if it doesn't mean much of anything, why would you not want to see signs of kind of working towards a unity and a peace? And that's because I think the right-wing people, that they don't want that. They want more tension and more war. Interesting to note, though, that Pence has actually done something similar, like make a political statement at a sporting event. Like about a year ago, I think it was, he went to a Colts game and left when they didn't stand for the anthem, and it was largely speculated that he did that on purpose to kind of get notice in the press. But yeah, it's just right-wing hypocrisy all the time. So then we go finally to Medicare and Social Security, and GOP plans to cut it. And I have an article written by Robert Reich. I'm going to read most of it because I think it really sums everything up pretty concisely. So, fresh off passing massive tax cuts for corporations and the wealthy, Trump and congressional Republicans want to use the deficit they've created to justify huge cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. So let's pause just for that. The tax plan that was just released recently, it creates a giant deficit of at least $1 trillion, if not more. So this was, really clever planning on the Republicans' part, because they've always wanted to gut these kind of programs, entitlement programs, as they would refer to them. They've always wanted to go after them, and now they have a reason to. There's like, we can't create a big deficit because we said we were not in favor of deficits. Oops, our plan created a huge deficit. All right, well, let's go after the programs that we wanted to always go after. So that's pretty convenient, huh? As House Speaker Paul Ryan says, we're going to have to get at entitlement reform, which is how you tackle the debt and the deficit. Social Security and Medicare are critical safety nets for working and middle-class families. Before they existed, Americans faced grim prospects. In 1935, the year Social Security was enacted, roughly half of America's seniors lived in poverty. By the 1960s, poverty among seniors had dropped significantly. But medical costs were still a major financial burden, and only half of Americans aged 65 and over had health insurance. Medicare fixed that, guaranteeing health care for older Americans. Today, less than 10% of seniors live in poverty, and almost all have access to health care. According to an analysis of census data, Social Security payments keep an estimated 22 million Americans from slipping into poverty. Medicaid is also a vital lifeline for America's elderly and the poor. Yet, the Trump administration has already started whittling it away by encouraging states to impose work requirements on Medicaid recipients. Republicans like to call these programs entitlements, as if they're some kind of giveaway. But Americans pay into Social Security and Medicare throughout their entire working lives. It's Americans' own money they're getting back through these programs. These vital safety nets should not be strengthened. Should be strengthened. Strengthened, not weakened. How? Number one, lift the ceiling on income tax. Excuse me. Oh my gosh, I'm having trouble today. Lift the ceiling on income subject to the Social Security tax. Currently, top earners only pay Social Security taxes on their first $120,000 of their yearly income, so the rich end up, in effect, paying a lower Social Security tax rate than everyone else. Lifting the ceiling on what wealthy Americans contribute would help pay for the baby boomers' retirements and leave Social Security in good shape for millennials. So that's a great idea. I'm pretty sure Bernie Sanders has proposed that idea. It's ridiculous that you have someone, Bill Gates is very rich, but let's just use him as an example. He pays the same in Social Security as you or I do. On their first $120,000. So after that, there's a certain cap. So you have to raise the cap on it, and you get more money. I mean, people, first of all, fearmonger, mostly on the right, that, Social Security is going to run out of money, oh my gosh. Well, that's not even true, because it's going to remain solvent until like 2030 something, and after that it's going to pay out like 75-80% of the benefits. So it's not even really true that it's going bankrupt, like all this like, oh God, we got to do something right now. Well, there's a lot of easy fixes that you could make sure it's going to pretty much last forever, or at least, a much longer time. Number two, allow Medicare to negotiate with drug companies for lower prescription drug prices. This was definitely something that Bernie proposed. As the nation's largest insurer, Medicare has tremendous bargaining power. Why should Americans pay far more for drugs than people in any other country? And it makes total sense. Bernie's proposal about re-importing drugs from Canada would have meant, a great thing for middle-class people who struggle to pay for their health care, because it's the same drugs. It's the same drugs that start in the U.S., they're made in the U.S., they go into Canada, and they're cheaper, and then we can buy them at that price and bring them back into the United States. Finally, reduce all overall health costs and create a stronger workforce by making Medicare available to all. There's no excuse for the richest nation in the world to have 28 million Americans still uninsured. And that's completely true. This idea that we can't afford it, anytime anyone says we can't afford Medicare for all, we can't afford single-payer health care, just tell them this fact. Our current system costs $49 trillion, I believe it is. If we switch to a Medicare for all system, the number would be $32 trillion. You would save, what's my math skills? $17 trillion. And there you go. It's a more efficient way of doing things. The reason for that is when you have private plans, there's hundreds and hundreds of plans. You have to have so many people do administrative work, like hundreds more. And with a Medicare system, there's so much less administrative costs. I've talked about the actual numbers before, but that's just the reality of it. You have a single insurer, and it's simple and easy. That's the way it is. And people, say waiting times, all that, but that's for elective procedures. If it's a medically necessary procedure, you're going to get health care. Just like now, you go to the emergency room. It's no different, really. So, at the end of the day here, I've made this point before, but Trump is not looking out for the everyday American. He's just not. He's making decisions that go in the opposite of progress. He's doing things that are going to hurt middle class Americans, and that's exactly what he promised not to do.